to sort of help you out. So we're going to jump right into it. We have talked, about what it means to lay low. We've talked about what it means to be 3 steps ahead. And we've also talked about when and why a boss needs to use murder as an equalizer. This week, we are going to continue our series called Being the Boss. We're also going to finish the 27 items of advice that Niccolo Machiavelli gives for war. But first, some tidbits about being a boss. Machiavelli long stated how a ruler comes into power. One can be elected by his associates, one can have the skill set to do it, and some attain that power through sheer luck. I think for the sake of this, we can mention 3 men who each of these things were on display. Skill set, obviously Lucky Luciano, Vincent Gigante. But we could also apply Lucky Luciano to being elected as well. But that truly goes for the majority of mob bosses. They're supported by the men that are around them. Luck is an entirely different beast. Luck means everything just aligns right and nothing more comes into the forefront than Sammy the Bull Gravano, who is a piece of shit, by the way. But him becoming an underboss of the Gambino crime family was sheer luck and nothing more. So I want to talk about something too. This is going to be very important. When in doubt of anything, always ask yourself, who has the most to gain? So if somebody's trying to fuck you, right? Who has the most to gain? If we think about YouTube and all the wars that are going on with all the content creators, who is the one person of all the creators? Like, I'm not involved in MobTube, so please don't count me. But maybe if you want to, maybe you think I'm shrewd enough and Machiavellian enough to be behind the scenes making everybody fight. I've had somebody accuse me of that, but that's not true. I'm not involved in any of that. But ask yourself, of all these creators, who is the one that has the most to gain by creating friction in the background for everybody else? I know who that is because I'm not stupid. But maybe you guys can think about that. Become Machiavelli for a minute. Think 3 steps ahead. Who is the one person of all the content creators in MobTube that stands the most to gain from everyone else fighting? Because if everybody else is fighting, they can't attack that one creator. So I'm applying that to this, is always ask yourself, who has the most to gain? Who has the most to profit? And so what is often not discussed is how Salvatore Sammy the Bull Gravano comes into power. Remember, he started his life of crime within the Colombo crime family, and that didn't exactly work out for him. He didn't even stick to the rules from the beginning of getting involved with that crime family either. At one point, he wanted to kill a made guy for no reason. Now, he invents different reasons, but the reality is he didn't. The Colombos were going to kill him. It's that simple. He was breaking the rules even then. And that's what he's in his 20s. Eventually, rather than get killed, he's transferred into the Gambino crime family. Gravano, who wasn't really anybody in the Gambinos, let's just be honest, the majority of those 19 murders that he likes to brag about, they come after his rise into the Gambino ranks, meaning not until he became a captain. He went from a captain to an underboss he went from nothing to captain to underboss all within like a year. Okay? So the majority of those murders came within like a 3-year span. Okay? Let's just be honest about that. Had Frankie DeCicco never gotten killed, Gravano would be just another nobody in the mafia. Many people don't look past the wall coverings with Sammy Gravano. They simply believe that his utterances, and they never do the basic research. Remember when we talk on this show, I always say, and I always say this, to find out the truth, always ask yourself, who has the most to gain? Who had the most to gain by Paul Castellano getting killed? Well, that's simple. That's John Gotti. Who had the most to gain by Lucky Luciano getting deported back to Italy, losing his foothold in Cuba? Easy. That's Vito Genovese. Who had the most to gain by Carlo Gambino and Tommy Lucchese getting killed? Joe Bonanno. To put it in a grander sort of viewpoint, let's look at Angelo Ruggerio for a second. And this is why I love doing this sort of stuff on the show, because nobody talks about this. Nobody does. I'll challenge any of you to tell me anybody else talking about this kind of stuff. It's always, oh yeah, he was a gangster. He killed 19 people. Like they don't get into the psychology of everything. So Angelo Ruggerio attempts to kill Anthony Gaspipe Casso. What did he have to gain by doing that? Well, easy. He wanted his drug rackets. He wanted him out of the way. He didn't want a rival. Angelo was a drug dealer from day one. And the second that his brother Salvatore Ruggerio got killed in that airplane crash, it was Angelo who went after his brother's drug rackets immediately, went after his money and went after all his contacts. Hours after his brother was killed in a plane, he had broken into his brother's house, who was hiding in New Jersey, because he wanted to get all the contacts to take over his drug business. Gaspipe was a rival in the Lucchese crime family. Meanwhile, and I want you to pay close attention to something, there were a dozen photos, and they're online too. I have some that aren't online, but there are some that you can see. See how often there are photos of Sammy Gravano and Gaspipe Casso together. Also see how many photos were taken of them after the Frankie DeCicco hit and prior to the Frankie DeCicco hit, which is going to lead us to this. So Gaspipe gets shot and somehow he lives. The bloodletting begins. This is going to be a little long-winded, so just follow me close, because I'm going to bring you into a world of street politics for just a few minutes. Casso, who was a made guy, was in every single right by the mob code to kill whoever was involved. That means whoever ordered it's going to go, whoever carried it out is going to go. Angelo Ruggerio set that up. He got Jimmy Hidell to do it. What is interesting here is that Jimmy Hidell was the nephew of Danny Marino, a captain within the Gambino crime family, and a guy that John Gotti Jr. essentially gave up information on. And that is true, so I'm not saying anything that's not accurate. When John sat down with the federal agents, he talked a lot about Danny Marino and Joe Watts, who Jr. would follow that up on a YouTube video by saying that those were his enemies. Maybe that's how he justifies it. I don't know. And that's a subject for another thing. I'm not getting involved in it. I'm just making a relevant point. Gaspipe, as we know, captured Jimmy Hidell with the help of Stephen Caracappa and Louis Ippolito. They tortured him and eventually would shoot him, 9, 10, 11, 12 times. Who knows? There's an interview with Ed Bragley where Gaspipe smirks and kind of laughs about how many times he shot Jimmy Hidell. Maybe 9, 10, 20. Gaspipe wanted more blood. He wanted revenge. And this is where it gets interesting. Without hesitation, Gaspipe Casso would be in his right to kill Angelo Ruggerio, hands down. Angelo at the time, though, has his own problems. As we discussed in the Gambino series, he had multiple indictments going on against him. He was a live wire. He was the kind of guy who was, on 5 dozen some fucking wiretaps? So Casso kills Hidell in 1986. This is after John Gotti becomes the official boss of the family. Alongside Gotti is Frankie DeCicco and Joe N. Gallo, not Sammy Gravano. Now, Hidell gets clipped in 1986. Okay, so after Hidell gets clipped, Casso wants more. Ruggerio was essentially thrown out of the mafia in 1986, 87. He also had some 3 different cases coming up against him. He eventually gets diagnosed with cancer, which would ultimately kill him. It's not that Angelo would have been hard to find. It's not that Casso wouldn't have been able to get to him, but I think from Casso's perspective, he wanted to impact the Gambino crime family. Angelo was really a nothing to them. But because Angelo was close to John Gotti, it might have been Casso's position that Ruggerio at the time, who wasn't even a captain, he had been demoted because of his actions, especially for the drug shit, that, maybe Casso felt that, listen, Ruggerio did this and there's no way he would have done it without John Gotti not knowing John Gotti's complicit too. And maybe that's the way that Casso felt. We all know that John Gotti turned a blind eye to drugs. Those are facts. Did he turn a blind eye to the Casso thing, or did Ruggerio do this without Gotti knowing? At some point, Gotti had to know Ruggerio was involved. Do I think that John Gotti knew Ruggerio was doing that? No, I don't think he did. I think he knew after the fact, but it's a little too late after the fact. I don't think he had any direct knowledge of it at the time. Had that been the case, I'm going to tell you for a fact, John Gotti would have killed Angelo Ruggerio. He would have let them kill Angelo. because despite Gotti's discrepancies in certain other issues, he was Cosa Nostra through and through. And there were very much two John Gottis. The John Gotti prior to the Castellano hit, and then there's the John Gotti after the Castellano hit. Gotti was more fair after he became boss. He didn't mince words, and if his men stepped out of line, they would be killed without hesitation. And we've noted that before when one of his guys got out of line in New Jersey with Phil Narducci. And then there was a large sit-down between Gotti, the captain involved, and Nicky Scarfo and Phil Narducci. Gotti ends up siding with Nicky Scarfo and explains, if any one of my men gets out of line, kill him. You got permission, do it. So that tells you that Gotti could side with what was right. Okay? So in any event, Casso probably believed that Gotti knew, or at least somehow had some sort of complicity, at least after the fact. And so he wanted more than an eye for an eye. And this is where history tends to get twisted in the wind with a large gap. And let me state this for the record. Vinny Gigante did not like John Gotti at all. John Gotti was scared of Vinny the Chin and his power. In fact, when John Gotti told Vinny the Chin that John Jr. had been made, Vinny the Chin shook his head and said, that's horrible. And that Vinny Gigante never recognized John Gotti Jr. as the boss. And that's another thing. John Gotti Jr. was never the boss of the Gambino crime family. He was on a panel. He was one of three people. He never, ever was single-handedly alone the boss of that family. That's another thing nobody ever really says. There was a panel, so each of them had equal. So, I mean, in essence, yeah, you could say he was a boss, but he wasn't like his father, okay? Not in intelligence, he wasn't like his father. In brutality, he wasn't like his father. He was slow compared to his father. Just two very different people. But John Gotti was never John Gotti Jr. was never single-handedly the boss of that family. That's a fact. And I'm not using that as like a disparaging thing. I'm just telling you the truth. Vincent the Chin Gigante would have been in his right to kill John Gotti after what he did to Paul Castellano, but he didn't. Believe me, if Chin wanted John Gotti dead, he would have been dead. It's just that simple. A lot of people have claimed that the bombing was meant for John Gotti and ordered by Vinny the Chin. The mere fact that Gaspipe Casso was the one who set that up should prove to all of you otherwise, especially since you know the backstory and why Casso was so fucking angry. So let's go to the damn question. Gotti was supposed to be picked up, I think, by either Frankie DeCicco or Bobby Borriello. I'm not sure which one it was. He was heading, I believe it was Frankie DeCicco. John Gotti was supposed to come to Jimmy Brown's club to iron out the leftovers that were still a bit pissed off about the Castellano murder. And that's one thing that Gotti knew he had to do. He had to mend fences a bit, and he had to show face. At Jimmy Brown's club was Sammy Gravano, who never explained why he was there to begin with. 2 blocks down on the left-hand side was a Lucchese social club. Now, there's a few things here. We can all agree on what John Gotti looks like, right? Unmistakable features, good-looking guy, dresses immaculately, so we all know what he looks like. Do you know what Frankie DeCicco looks like? They dress differently. They look much differently. So there's a difference in the way they look. They look nothing alike. John Gotti has gray hair. Frankie DeCicco had black hair. I mean, that's like the biggest thumbprint if you ever needed one. Number 2, with the social clubs being so close together, I think the average guy knows what John Gotti drives or who drives John Gotti. We can agree to that too, right? Okay. We can, number 3, how in the hell would Casso know that Gotti was even coming to that club that day? How would he even know that? Number 4, do we think it was Gotti who was targeted for death or Frankie DeCicco? As I said, they look different. They don't even look alike. What is known is this. Gotti calls and explains to Frankie DeCicco or whoever was there at the time, might have been Bobby Borriello, that he has to be somewhere else. And I think it was Frankie. Can Frankie come back to Howard Beach and pick him up? Bobby says, yeah, not a problem. And he heads out the door. Gravano, who was sitting by the window, suddenly gets up and makes a call on a payphone. These are backed up by witnesses and informants. Suddenly, Gravano leaves the club without saying a word, travels out of the club and heads the opposite direction away from Frankie DeCicco's car. That completely rebuffs the idea that Gravano was there to pick up the pieces of Frankie's body. In fact, Gravano came back to the scene not 25 minutes later. So all of this narrative that he was there and saw the whole thing is bullshit. The explosive used to kill Frankie DeCicco was placed underneath of his car, meaning somebody had to walk up and put it physically underneath of the car. Then they physically had to watch and press the fucking button. Okay? And they had to do that without anybody seeing them. Casso was on record as saying that they could see the club from down the block and who came and went. So you never see Gotti come near the place and you use the bomb anyway? The man responsible for the bomb was Herbert Pate. And he was an alleged Genovese associate. But the truth is that Gaspipe had used this guy multiple times for other things. And so was Pate an on-the-record associate? No, he wasn't an on-the-record associate. He was a fringe guy. And he was an ex-explosive cop guy. Okay? So we just need to put that there. And that's been the story for decades. And I think Casso lied point blank to the feds. I would too. I don't think Vinny the Chin would have been involved in that or greenlit that. He wouldn't have used a bomb. And the reason why he wouldn't have gone along with that is because he would have been worried about somebody, an innocent bystander, getting killed. Chin would have never allowed that. And that's just the truth. I think that's a lie that Gaspipe Casso used to sort of indict the Chin to get more juice to get himself out of prison when he becomes a rat. But in all reality, it was Vicamuso and Casso who designed the murder of Frankie DeCicco. And I also think there was another person involved in that, and that was Sammy Gravano. Why was Gravano seen multiple times just prior to that meeting with Gaspipe Casso? Like I said earlier, there's surveillance photos that prove that. Why is he seen meeting with him after the fact, especially when it's been said that Gotti was irate over the murder of DeCicco? He was hell-bent on war in the coming months. Gotti was going to go to war. It shows duplicity in Gravano, which has long been his modus operandi. What's good for Sammy the Bull Gravano is good for Sammy the Bull. He killed Alan Kaiser, but yet twist that story into saying that Alan Kaiser ran towards two men with shotguns. Are you fucking crazy? No 17-year-old is going to run towards gunfire. They're going to run away. Plus, the reason why Gravano uses that is because they lured Alan Kaiser to the car and then blew his head off with a shotgun at point blank range. So they used that by saying, well, he was shot from the front. He ran towards the car. Bullshit. Complete and utter bullshit. However Sammy the Bull Gravano can climb the ladder, he's going to do that. As far as the Genovese perspective, as I said before, Vinny the Chin turned a blind eye to it. He let them sort themselves out. If the Lucchese's were going to war with the Gambinos, oh well, let them fucking kill each other. And Gigante would be the one that would reap the rewards. So after DeCicco is killed, Joe Armone becomes the new underboss, but eventually would retire. Not Joe Armone, Joe Ngallo, my bad. But as a result of that hit, who picked up most of Frankie DeCicco's rackets? That's right, Sammy the Bullshitter did, Union specifically. So all this talk about how smart Gravano was with construction, the unions, it wasn't because of his business acumen. It was because he helped kill to get it. Or he killed to get it. That's his MO, kill to acquire. Gravano doesn't come underboss until 87, 88. And then him and John Gotti are off the streets 3 years later. Not exactly a long run. But in those years, 2.5 years, 19 murders. I said it earlier. Look at who Gravano killed. Robert DiBernardo, harmless, wealthy. Nick Scabetta, harmless, unless you count the sexual relationship him and Sammy were having. Also a lot of people don't know Nick Scabetta had a huge $1 million drywall company. Guess who took that over? Sammy did after he killed him. Do I need to keep going? The entire point is some attain by luck, some attain it by design. If Frankie DeCicco doesn't get killed, Sammy never becomes anything. He stays a soldier. Maybe he gets to capo, right? He never controls all of the lucrative businesses that he ends up getting because he was in no position to run them or take them over without anything other than hostile force. Gotti would have killed him, straight up. So who had the most to gain by Frankie DeCicco getting killed? Bobby Borello gets killed a couple of months later by the Lucchese's down the line, and the Gambinos don't retaliate at all. They do nothing. There was never any retaliation by the Gambinos. Why? Just ask yourself, who has the most to gain? It applies to life, it applies to the streets, and it applies to what we're talking about. If you have someone who has more to gain with you not around, you better start watching their rearview mirror and watching it hard. And this all leads me to street politics. A boss, as we've said multiple times, has to be even keel. He has to be able to sort of delegate in a way that benefits his side of the fence, as well as not cross the wrong side of the street. Veni the Cingigante was a guy who played street politics better than most. Just as we spoke about, he could have in every way just killed John Gotti and there would have been no issue with it. We said last week, he sat back and turned a blind eye to the nonsense and let the chips fall and the cards fall wherever they needed to fall. Gigante knew John Gotti could and might react to the Lucchese's. And that wasn't his fucking problem. They could fight it out. And Gigante would sit back and just say, okay, let them kill each other and I'll take over everything. And it's like saying, please don't do this, but then behind the scenes, shutting your eyes and backing quietly the retributive factions. We've seen that a million times in the mob. Paul Castellano, when he was boss, and the Westies were out of their fucking minds, he could have justifiably killed every single fucking one of them. But with little hesitation, instead, he brings them into the fold and he allows them to kill at his behest, which did take the heat off the Gambinos, which was a smart move in many ways, but it's also the same fucking thing that brought Paul Castellano down. Paul Castellano repeatedly trusted the wrong people. Luciano was politicking behind the scenes when he knew that Joe Masseria and Maranzano had to go. You cannot take without giving something back. He essentially paid for Bonanno to be a snake in the grass, but he appealed to Joe Bonanno's ego. But I guess, he didn't think too much further down the road. But I also think Luciano and Lucchese controlled Bonanno largely to some extent. It's all about being respected and somewhat fair. Nicky Scarfa was the pure example of what a boss should never be. Profaci's another one. They're all out for themselves. So when a boss's back is up against the fucking wall, what does he do? What can he do? How does he command his army with strategies that he could use to stack his side of the deck? As we said earlier, Machiavelli spoke specifically about this. And one of the things that Machiavelli has said is, and I'm paraphrasing it best, is that a king or a boss or a leader should never ever give his men too much. Give them just enough so that they want for nothing, but they can move towards getting a little more. You give them too much, they overthrow you out of greed. You give them not enough and they will starve to death and then they will overthrow you to acquire. So in other words, there's sort of a middle ground. Men who seek nothing but your attention are men who will be loyal to, men who seek nothing but your affection are men who will be loyal to the end. Those who use your name and use your ego against you are snakes in the garden. Think about Sammy Gravano. That's who applies to that. So here's a couple other tidbits. The virtue of the soldiers is worth more than the multitude, and the sight is often more beneficial than virtue. So in other words, the men you have around you, those in the hierarchy, their virtue, what they believe in is important. However, the ones who carry out day-to-day things, the soldiers, the things that they believe in are more important than everyone else being on the same page, because those are the ones that are going to defend you. Those are the guys in the trenches. They're the ones that believe in you, and they have the same mindset, and having the same mindset is a powerful thing. Think Philadelphia for a second. The entire family is flanked by all like-minded men. The hierarchy has been the same for 25 fucking years, give or take, one or two. They haven't taken a steep pinch. Surely, some guys have done prison time, but the next 2 or 3 who step in and the hierarchy are all like-minded. And it's not to say that secretly maybe 1 or 2 doesn't want things for themselves, but they believe in the boss is the boss until death or retirement. It wouldn't take a lot for Philadelphia to revolt against Joey Merlino. It really wouldn't. But that's a bond. There's a friendship, and that means more to them by any false sense of ego. There is a guy there who has a giant ego. And that's going to play out however that's going to play out. But name me any other mob family that has that, and you're not going to be able to tell me one that does. You're not. New and speedy things frighten armies, while the customary and slow things are esteemed little by them. You will therefore make your army experienced and learn the strength of a new enemy by skirmishes before you come to take engagement with them. And you can apply this to Gotti taking over the Gambinos. Your men have an easier time with the standard that's set before them than a new brash dictator that comes in. So think Nicky Scarfo for a second. A dictator comes in and wants to change everything, and it leaves your men unsteady. Like Nicky Scarfo, he was all over the place, and and maybe he kept his men in line a little bit, but it made them walk on eggshells. And look at how that ended. Slow and steady is the way to go, and it allows your men to gain experience, and they know how to combat the enemies. That being said, also, a new and fearless leader who cannot be tracked, or someone you cannot determine what they're going to do, puts the enemies on watch, and it puts the enemy on its heels. So you can kind of work it both ways. It's also been said, what your enemy expects, do the opposite. Works every single time. Never, ever, ever allow anybody in any facet of life, in a job, in a friendship, to know exactly what you're going to do when you're going to do it. Never speak in anger. Never. Always allow everyone to think you're even-keeled, you're fair, and you understand. Keep in whatever retributive, whatever revenge type of shit you have, never act on impulse immediately. Wait. Just wait. Anger can simmer, and anger can lower, but disrespect will always be there. So for somebody that say angers you today, you don't have to do anything now, because they're going to expect it from you if that's the type of person you are. That's why I said don't be somebody that they can expect. Don't be somebody that somebody can read. If somebody thinks, oh, if I just talk about Jeff Canarsie, he's going to come on YouTube and call me all kinds of 4-letter words. Yeah, at one point that is what I would have done. Now I play it a little differently. All right, so whoever pursues a routed enemy in disorganized manner does nothing but become vanquished from having been a victor in war. So if you're not organized, if the castle you build, if the wall crumbles, the moat dries up, you're finished. You have got to be in line. You have to be fully organized. Otherwise, the ceiling will topple, and the ceiling is going to topple on your head. Insulation is key. Tired men will always have time to sleep when they're dead. Casso comes to mind. Look, rather than be content and plan things out, he just goes fucking nuts and just starts killing everybody. And he paid for that. Had he plotted, had he waited for another day, and he led the deer to the salt lick, then he would have been better off. I'm not justifying murder, because some of you are going to go, wow, look at him justifying murder. I'm just telling you how it works. Change your proceeding when you become aware that the enemy has foreseen it. And this is a monster thing. Out of all of the ones we've ever talked about, this is the fucking one. Granted, it can be attributed to war, but this is a huge thing and can be interpreted a million different ways. First of all, if the enemy reads you well, or you become predictable, you're simply serving yourself up as the lamb to the slaughter. Do not be predictable in any sense. Not just in business, but in war. But when it comes to law enforcement, don't hang out with a hierarchy. All it does is show patterns. The feds work off patterns. They assimilate in 3 ways: physical surveillance, wiretaps, and fucking rats. Those are the 3 big things that the feds can do. If we know that, why the hell serve yourself up like that? Stop using the phone. Don't meet together like the fucking Medea family fucking reunion. Most of this comes down to ego and laziness. Bottom line, if you're a boss, what is important is that the ship keeps sailing. You have men that will tell you when land is near. You don't need to stand on the fucking deck waving your arms at the savages on the shore who are just waiting to throw spears at you and fucking eat you. Calculate your options. Do not give yourself up by design. If law enforcement or enemies easily predict what you're going to do, then I said you're just setting yourself up. I think the FBI largely suspected that Vinny Gigante might strike at John Gotti down the line for what he did to Castellano. And I think Gigante knew damn well that that's what they thought. And I think he knew he would damn well be the most logical suspect. So what does he do? He just backs off. Meanwhile, he slowly and quietly pushes gas pipe. You go ahead, you do it. Probably not realizing the gas pipe would ultimately blame him down the line. But he also knew that gas pipe was predictable. He knew that John Gotti was predictable. So there you have it. But you notice nothing happened to any of the Genovese family as a result of all of that. Maybe Bobby Manna, who was, a New Jersey Genovese guy. He's the one that really wanted to kill John Gotti. What is true is that Manna was caught on wiretaps discussing murdering John Gotti and Gene Gotti. But what people don't talk about is what that beef was actually really about. They have said it was over Castellano, but that's not what it was. The issue was John Gotti was trying hard to move into South New Jersey with Nicky Scarfo's help. And he wanted to leave New Jersey to the Genovese crime family. So him wanting to murder John Gotti had nothing to do with Paul Castellano. It was over money. Keep in mind that was all Philadelphia turf. But if you have a Genovese guy saying that, the FBI thinks, it must be Vinny the Chin that wants him gone. That's how stupid this is. Counsel with many on the things that you ought to do and confer with few on what you do afterwards. And it's just stating that having a reason to have a consigliere and how to use one. Have open conversation with the hierarchy on ideas. Think them through, make a decision, then discuss it after it's been done. These days, it's not safe to talk for the most part at all, but there are ways to do so without interference from the feds. It's stating getting opinions to make major decisions are good. On one hand, you're including men, and men want to feel like they're a part of the solution to a problem. They want to feel equal. They want to feel adequate, especially when it comes to thoughts and opinions. All bosses should do that. It gives you options. I think men will respect you more when you seek their counsel openly and honestly versus doing it to appease them. Counsel is invaluable. The idea of three minds are always better than one, but you have to be careful in how you do that. When soldiers are confined to their quarters, they are kept there by fear or punishment. Then when they are led by war, they are led by hope and reward. And you can apply that to many things, but the one way I see it is you keep your soldiers, you have to keep your soldiers down financially, but not too much. But if you keep them in the same rut, and if you don't allow them to eat, and they stay in the same mindset, the same position, that's going to lead to revolt. You enable them to earn, you enable them to eat. They want for nothing and are comfortable. Revolt is the last thing on their minds. Angelo Bruno, ring any bells? We mentioned it before. Had he allowed his men to sell meth, which is what the argument was all about, then he wouldn't have been killed. Instead, he tells them no, and then he allows the Gambinos to sell on his turf for a huge kickback. That's a bad example to set, regardless of whether or not we can agree that selling meth is a good idea. You cannot really attempt to have a moral stance when you're taking a kickback from it, and I get it. If none of his men are dealing, he cannot take a huge pinch for it. I understand that, but the situation got more compounded by the idea that Bruno was allowing encroachment into the camp from an enemy, or at least a perceived enemy. Good captains never come to an engagement unless necessity compels them or opportunity calls them. And this is one of those lines we can take a couple of different ways. And I think I'm going to let you guys all decide how that applies. We can easily apply it to don't be seen at a meeting. And if you do, make sure it's for a good fucking reason. If I told you today you're going to walk across the street and there's going to be a truck coming at you and you might get hit, but you might not get hit. Then if I tell you if you cross that street and there's a pot of gold, how many of you are going to take that risk? How many of you would be killed by that truck because your focus isn't on the impending doom and danger of the 2-ton truck barreling down the road? It's on that fucking pot. And we can apply that to the feds. 100%. And I hope you guys see where I'm going with that. Don't be blinded by something you may not be able to attain anyway. Longevity is the focus. Longevity is key. Otherwise, what's the fucking point? So here are a couple of my favorite quotes by Machiavelli, and then we're going to finish next week with the rest of them. I'm going to read a couple of them, and I'll sort of make an application to the first one. But this is where you guys get to do homework. I'm going to read these, and I want you guys to email me and tell me what you think it means, because I'm always curious as to see what other people think. And the way you can do that is by sending the email to mobtalkradioshow@gmail.com. So here we go. If you have to retaliate, if an injury has to be done to a man, it should be so severe that his vengeance not be feared. Simple terms, if you have to retaliate or you have to be aggressive, make sure it's so bad that no matter what a guy could hope to do, it's not going to matter. This is the one line that I've heard repeatedly discussed a lot with mafia guys. I'll be honest, an eye for an eye has its place in terms of retribution. But if you got to hurt somebody, end it, kill them. Make sure that there's nothing they can do to retaliate. And it's used to sort of delegate murder or to justify murder. And it's that simple. So here's a couple of things that I'm going to read to you, and you're going to love these. But I want all of you, if you're interested, email the show at mobtalkradioshow@gmail.com and let me know what you think. Excuse me. Let's see. It is not titles that honor men, but men that honor titles. I hear that in the streets a lot too. Okay. Hatred is gained as much by good works as evil. All right. One who deceives will always find those who allow themselves to be deceived. Act so your enemies do not know how you want to organize your army for battle. And in whatever way you organize them, arrange it so the first line can be received by the second and then by the third. Two more. In a battle, never use a company for some other purpose than what you have assigned it to do, unless you want to cause disorder. You guys are going to have fun with that one. And the last one. The unarmed rich man is the prize of a poor soldier. So give me your 2 cents, shuffle it over to mobtalkradio@gmail.com. I hope everybody enjoyed being the